Hello, this is my version of the Clayton Boyer design Toucan Clock. I wanted to show you the pieces before I did my final assembly. I made a few modifications from the original plans. Some of them were inspired by Andrew Nagel's version of the Toucan. He's also known as the Wooden Loon, so if you look on YouTube you can see his version of the Toucan. My frame here is made of walnut. I found a really nice piece of walnut when I was visiting relatives in another city. I live in a fairly small area and I don't really have a good source for nice wood like that. I use pieces of the walnut to make my pendulum wooden pieces, and I cut a cylinder, drilled a hole in it, and then cut the cap off, and I had that filled with some lead pellets. I had a little trouble finding a source of lead around here. It used to be years ago, hunters used to do a lot of their own reloading. Well, that's not so popular anymore, so I ended up buying a box of shotgun shells and just cutting the shells open and got the lead out of there. On the base, I didn't have enough walnut to make the whole base out of walnut as well, so I used poplar, but I had some really nice walnut veneer that I put on the top so to match with the frame and so forth. And an idea I got from Andrew was he used, on the very base, he put in some T-nuts and then used some brass screws so he could level the base. I wanted to do the same thing, but instead of just using brass screws, I had some little circular pieces from my walnut that I had, and then I cut a hole in the bottom, drilled a hole in a big countersink, and epoxied in my brass screws, so then they will fit into the T-nuts, and then I can use that as a leveling system. Another change I made, here is my 9-volt power supply. And of course it comes with a connector like this. I didn't want to cut that connector and hardwire it to the coil in the base because, well, if somebody trips over the cord or something, that puts a lot of extra strain on there. So I went ahead and bought a female end for that and a panel mount and cut a hole in the side so I can put the female end in here, mount that inside there, and then I can just plug in my power supply rather than having it hardwired in there. Here's my coil. I wound it according to the instructions. For the caps, I had an old computer modem that was now obsolete, and it had a plastic case on the side, so I cut pieces out of that plastic case to use for my caps. After winding the coil and soldering in the diode and the transistor, I put epoxy to seal all the wires in place. For the core, I just use a large iron nail, and then I ground off the top of it and polished it with finer and finer grits, finishing with a 2000 grit sandpaper to get it very nice and smooth and shiny, and then coated it with a clear lacquer, and then that piece sticks up and shows through the hole, and it's fairly flush with the surface. I've already tested out the coil in the pendulum and it works very well. Here is my clock face. I've made that out of poplar, and I took pieces of the walnut veneer and inlaid those in for the hour markings. I've already mounted the support dowels that will fit into the frame. And then for my hands, I just made some simple hands. I used plywood and then glued on pieces of the walnut veneer so that the hands will match. And then I think they'll look quite nice in contrast with the white poplar background and the walnut hour markings. Here are my end caps. I just used some buttons that you can buy in a package to plug in for screw holes, and I cut the little lip off the back of it and sanded them nice and smooth and put a walnut stain. Now for the walnut stain on the base, I went and just got some regular dark walnut stain and hoped that that would match the wood, but I tested it out on a piece of scrap and noticed that the walnut stain was mostly just black. However, when I put a finish on my real walnut wood, I notice it has a slight bit of red in it. It's not just straight black. And so that stain did not match very well. But I had some very red stain called gunstock that I used on my Simplicity clock. I stained some of the pieces on the Simplicity clock. I wanted that to have a nice red color to match the brass hardware and the copper pipes that I use for the weights. And then I thought, well, I'll try mixing some of that gunstock red stain in with the black walnut stain to get a little bit of a red tint. So I experimented. The first try, I tried one part of the gunstock and 3 parts of the black walnut, and it turned out perfect. So using 3 parts of the walnut, 1 part of the red stain, and tried it on some scrap, put the finish on it, and it looked beautiful. It looked just so it matches quite well, I think. So that turned out pretty well. The wheels, here the center wheel, the third wheel. I mean, here's the third wheel. This is the escape wheel, and the hour and intermediate wheels. I've already tested the wheels and the pinions, tested them out to make sure everything meshes together and everything spins nice and smoothly. And then I took them apart and put a finish on them. Be careful not to get the finish inside the gear teeth themselves and just on the faces. For finish, I just use a tung oil finish. I like to use an oil. I'm not very good with things like polyurethane. I can never seem to get it perfect without any bubbles or streaks. And of course, I didn't really want it to be real shiny. I just wanted to seal the wood good and bring out the nice color of the wood and the grain and everything. And I think tung oil does that very, very well. I really like the results of that. One of the other changes I made was to the cam, and I got that inspiration from Nagel's clock, and he made his cam to look somewhat like a bird. And so I wanted to do that too, but I went a step farther and I actually painted mine to look more like a toucan. I also made the upper paw much wider than the original one, so the beak looks more like a toucan beak. And before I painted it, I tested it out and it worked fine. Just like that. It worked very well just like that. So then after testing it out, I just painted it to look kind of like a toucan bird. What are some other changes that I made? There was something. Oh yes, the escape wheel on the plans, it called to drill a 9/64 hole through the pinion and the escape wheel and just mount it directly onto a 1/8 inch rod that presses in the frame in here. And when I did that and tested it out, I found I had too much play in my escape wheel and it wobbled quite a bit. And so instead I drilled the holes out bigger and put in a 5/32 brass tube insert inside. So now with the brass tube can ride on the 1/8 inch rod, and it spins quite nicely without any extra play. So it spins very smoothly with that. And that worked much better than just mounting wood directly onto the arbor and having it spin on the arbor. I also thought eventually that hole would wear out even a little bigger and get even more play in there. So I like that better. Also, to make the cam fit behind the third wheel, I extended it out a little bit. So I made my spacer a little bit larger. So I had to extend it out 1/8 of an inch, which also meant I had to move the pinion out 1/8 of an inch. So I just made those spacers a little bit bigger, and everything fits. There's plenty of room for that. Another thing I noticed is that this was supposed to press fit on the arbor, and when I did that, I had too much play, and it would spin on the arbor. The same thing with my pinion that drives the center wheel. It's a little bit too loose in there, so I turn this can spin in there. So I'm going to have to mount that, probably put some shellac or something on the inside of the hole so it fits on there tighter. And then on this one, since I extended the length of the connector, I also made it big enough where I could drill a hole and put in a set screw and then I can clamp it directly onto there. Okay, so I think that's about all of the features of the pieces, and now I've got all the finish on it. As again, as I said, I've already tested out the wheels before I put the finish on them, and everything works smoothly. So now I'm going to assemble everything and test it out and see if everything works with the finish. So I will come back later on. Alright, here's my completed Toucan. After I got it all back together, I let it run for, and I noticed about after 12 hours, the amplitude of the pendulum was slowing down a little bit, it was decreasing. And that was because I had too big of a gap between the magnet and the pendulum and the coil in the base. So I made that gap a little bit smaller. If you get it too small, the attraction between the magnet and the iron core is greater than the repulsive magnetism you get from the secondary coil in the windings, and it will stop. So I just finally found the right spot so it will continue to move. And it went for, like I said, I went for over a day now, so more than 24 hours, and it's been running very steadily. So everything seems to be working quite well. One other thing I did that I didn't mention in the beginning part of the video when I had it in pieces was on my arbors. I used a 632 thread die, and I cut some threads just at the end of the arbor, just in a little bit under 1/8 of an inch, just a few threads, and then I can screw the caps on and they stay on much better. I tried press fitting them on my other clock, and I noticed that after the wood dries out they tend to fall off, and you don't really want to glue them on in case you need to do any maintenance. So I had a thread die, and so I just cut a few threads right in the end, and that worked really well, so I was happy with that. I also did that on my Simplicity clock, and but on my Simplicity, rather than wooden buttons, I used some nice looking brass nuts that fit the 632 thread that I found. So here is the clock running now. I'm really happy the way it turned out. It looks real nice. If I go around to the side, you can see the connection for my 9-volt power supply with the panel mount. I can just plug it in and out if I want to move the clock. But everything else looks pretty good. So I want to thank Drew Nagel for his inspiration for the Toucan. And if you are interested in building one of Clayton Boyer's clocks, I strongly suggest that you look at Drew Nagel's, he's aka the Wooden Loon. Look at his videos on building the number 6. I found them invaluable on building my Simplicity. Also, Adrian Airedale has some really nice videos and some really good information on building clocks as well, some instructions there. So check out Adrian Airedale's videos as well. You can find those on YouTube. But Clayton designs these beautiful, beautiful clocks, and really, really a lot of fun to build. I've really enjoyed building both of my clocks. So again, I'm just really happy with this. It's just ticking away. The little bird is very busy, doesn't seem to get tired pushing that wheel around. Okay, well, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks again.